And fear comes because of the lack of knowledge. Okay, so, and that's why I have a show, because I came to a country that they love dogs, but they didn't know dogs.
Everything changed when Cesar Millan's life began falling apart. What the world saw was the dog whisperer. What almost nobody saw was the personal crisis unfolding behind the scenes. A chapter so devastating it nearly changed everything. So, what really happened to Cesar Millan? And how did the man who helped millions find himself fighting his own hardest battle? Join us as we uncover how the dog whisperer lost everything. The night he tried to die. In 2010, Cesar Millan tried to end his own life. He overdosed on pills and survived, waking up to find out the attempt had failed, in the middle of what he later called the lowest point he had ever reached emotionally and psychologically. There was no warning to the public beforehand, no hint in interviews or on the show that anything was wrong. Fans had no idea that the man behind that character had just tried to end his own life. This was the man who'd spent years on national television projecting nothing but calm, confident energy. The guy networks paid to walk into the most chaotic, aggressive dogs in America and bring total peace into the room, in front of cameras that captured every confident step he took. Off camera, his own life had just fallen apart completely, all at once, with nobody watching and no script to fall back on. Before any of that collapse, Cesar had built one of the most unlikely success stories in American reality television. He had arrived in the United States from rural Mexico without legal documentation, eventually working his way up from nothing, taking on menial jobs that had nothing to do with television, into one of the most recognizable faces on cable. By the mid-2000s, he was a bona fide phenomenon, a man whose name had become shorthand for an entire approach to dog training, broadcast in more than 80 countries and turned into books, speaking tours, and even a children's animated series called Mutt and Stuff, stretching his brand well beyond the original adult-focused reality format that had made him famous in the first place. So, how did a man this famous and successful end up swallowing a bottle of pills to end his life? What exactly went wrong? How it all came apart in 1 year. That same year, 2010, Cesar's wife, Illusion, filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. The marriage had been the backbone of his entire career. Illusion had served as CEO of Cesar Millan, Inc., and co-produced Dog Whisperer for several seasons before the split. The woman who'd helped build the business empire around his name, who'd sat in boardrooms and production meetings shaping the company alongside him for years, was suddenly walking away from it, and from him. At the same time, everything else was falling apart. Right around then, his beloved pit bull Daddy, the dog who had appeared alongside him on the show for years and became something close to a co-star in his own right, died. For a man whose entire identity and career were built on his bond with dogs, losing the one dog most closely tied to his own personal story landed like losing a member of his own family. Not just a pet who happened to appear on camera, but the animal that had walked beside him through years of building the entire career now threatening to collapse around him. He later described feeling defeated, carrying a big sense of guilt and failure, all while drowning in what he called the lowest emotional and psychological point of his life. And then came the money. Cesar has openly admitted he lost $10 million to bad business decisions around this same period, decisions he's never fully explained in detail, only confirming flatly, "At the end of the day, I was left with no money. I was broke. A divorce, a dead dog, and $10 million gone, all crashing down inside the same brutal 12 months of his life." It's almost impossible to imagine surviving that combination, let alone surviving it while still being expected to show up on national television looking calm and in control, demonstrating the exact emotional steadiness he'd built his entire brand around, while his real life was falling apart in every direction at once. He's never gone into detail about exactly what those bad business decisions actually were, only confirming the bottom-line result. Whatever the specifics, the timing made everything dramatically worse. A man losing his marriage and his closest animal companion in the same stretch, where he also discovered his finances had quietly collapsed underneath him. But the worst part of that year wasn't even the money he lost. It was what he discovered he'd never actually owned in the first place. He didn't even own his own name. Somewhere in the wreckage of that period, Cesar learned something that should have been unthinkable for the single most recognizable dog trainer on the planet. He didn't own the rights to his own nickname, the Dog Whisperer. The name that had made him a household word, printed on book covers, DVD boxes, merchandise racks, and a hit National Geographic series watched in dozens of countries, legally belonged to someone else entirely. In a later interview, Cesar explained he had expected 50-50 ownership of the Dog Whisperer brand and rights. He said the people behind the show never actually honored that arrangement, calling them flatly dishonest. For a man who'd built his entire reputation on trust, between a dog and its owner, between a trainer and a frightened animal, finding out that same value of trust had not been extended to him by his own business partners must have stung in a particularly personal way. That fight over ownership didn't end quietly behind closed doors either. It turned into one of the messiest, longest-running legal battles in reality television history. One that would eventually drag in network executives, independent auditors, and lawyers on every side of the dispute. The network bled him for millions. Cesar's production company, Emery/Sumner Productions, eventually sued the show's co-producers, MPH Entertainment, alleging financial misconduct. National Geographic Channel itself later sought to join that fight, claiming it had been underpaid by millions of dollars. A hit show watched in more than 80 countries had quietly turned into a tangled financial battlefield, with the very people who'd helped build Cesar's fame now fighting each other and him over who actually owed who. Separately, MPH Emery/Sumner also went after National Geographic Channel directly, accusing the network of distributing episodes on Hulu without proper rights starting in 2009 and of using nearly $500,000 in withheld payments as leverage to try to force a more favorable distribution deal. The production company called it an attempted extortion. National Geographic disputed the characterization, but the dispute dragged the show's finances into federal court on top of everything already playing out at the state level. After years of legal fighting, Cesar finally secured a 50% profit-sharing arrangement in the Dog Whisperer brand. A partial win after everything he'd already lost. That arrangement came with a right to audit the show's finances every year, a basic safeguard meant to make sure he was actually getting paid what he was owed. In 2018, when his lawyers tried to use that right and actually conduct the audit, the producers simply refused to cooperate. Meanwhile, on the other side of the business, MPH Entertainment was accusing an independent auditor of finding the exact opposite story, that Cesar himself owed them more than $4 million due to what they called improper accounting practices on his end. Two sides, both claiming the other owed millions, locked in a fight that dragged on for years across multiple courtrooms, with no clean villain and no clean ending for anyone watching from the outside. MPH Entertainment, for its part, pushed back hard on the characterization that it had ever shortchanged its star, expressing what it called sadness and outrage that a partner of 10 years would file what it described as a meritless claim, insisting publicly that the facts would speak for themselves once the case actually reached a judge. Whichever side eventually came out ahead in the accounting, the larger picture was unmistakable. A hit show that had once been the most ordinary kind of feel-good reality programming, a guy training problem dogs, had spent years quietly fueling some of the messiest, most expensive legal infighting in the genre. And underneath all of that financial warfare, an entirely separate set of problems was quietly building in the background, one with actual victims, actual lawsuits, and actual injuries that had nothing to do with money, ownership disputes, or broken business partnerships at all. The dog that ended his TV show. The earliest of these incidents predates even the 2010 collapse by several years, showing the pattern of controversy stretching back almost to the very start of his television fame. Back in 2006, a producer working on the Dog Whisperer set claimed Cesar's own dog, Gator, was left bleeding, covered in bruises, and gasping for breath after being choked with a collar and overworked at Cesar's Dog Psychology Center. The producer, Floyd Suarez, said he spent more than $25,000 on medical bills, and the lawsuit was eventually settled. 9 years later, in 2015, a Florida nurse named Allison Bitney sued Cesar after a dog trained at his facility was released prematurely and attacked her, leaving her with wounds severe enough to require reconstructive surgery. She wasn't a random bystander either. Nurses understand medical trauma about as well as anyone, which made her own account of the severity of her injuries carry extra weight in the public conversation that followed. A separate lawsuit detailed a strikingly similar pattern. A dog that had been ordered euthanized after attacking someone in Texas was instead taken in by Cesar's Center for Rehabilitation, only to be released again once its owner fell behind on payments. And it went on to attack someone else entirely. A court order to put a dangerous dog down is about as serious a warning as the legal system can issue, and overriding that warning with a rehabilitation program only for the same dog to bite again raised obvious questions about how thoroughly that second chance was actually being monitored. In 2016, Cesar came under official investigation for possible animal cruelty after a pet pig was bitten on the ear by a dog being trained on camera for his show, Cesar 911. Investigators ultimately found no wrongdoing and closed the case. Even an investigation that ends in no charges still leaves a mark on the public record. One more headline permanently tied to his name, regardless of the eventual outcome. Each individual incident might have looked like an isolated accident on its own. Stacked together year after year, they painted a much harder question for viewers to ignore. Was the same dog rehabilitation system that made Cesar famous quietly putting people in danger behind the scenes the entire time? The pattern across these cases, spanning nearly 2 decades and multiple states, kept repeating itself in an unsettling way. A dangerous dog gets a second chance through Cesar's rehabilitation program rather than being put down. That second chance eventually runs out, whether through a missed payment or a lapse in supervision, and the dog ends up back out in the world, sometimes attacking someone new. Defenders of his methods point out that any program working with genuinely aggressive animals will carry real risk, no matter how careful the operation is. Critics argue the repetition itself is the problem, the same kind of incident showing up again and again over the better part of 2 decades. That question got a lot louder once a famous singer's name got dragged into the headlines, turning a story about workplace safety into a full-blown celebrity gossip item almost overnight. The pit bull that mauled an Olympic hopeful. In 2021, Cesar was sued by a woman named Lydia Mattis, whose mother worked for him. Lydia claimed that during a 2017 visit to a building Cesar owned, his pit bull Junior was roaming the hallway off-leash with no supervision, lunged at her, and bit her multiple times on the legs, injuries severe enough to send her to the emergency room. Lydia had been a competitive gymnast being recruited by a university gymnastics program at the time, and according to her lawsuit, the attack ended her path toward a future in the sport entirely. Years of training, sacrifice, and a genuine shot at a college athletic career, allegedly wiped out in a matter of seconds by a dog that was never supposed to be roaming free in the first place. The lawsuit didn't stop at her own injuries either. It alleged Cesar should have already known Junior was dangerous, claiming the same dog had previously killed a pet belonging to Queen Latifah. A representative for Cesar called that claim a blatant lie. Queen Latifah herself never confirmed or denied any of it publicly, and a photo of her standing next to Cesar stayed up on her own social media account well after the lawsuit became public. The case was eventually settled privately, with no public confirmation of fault on either side. What very nearly ended his reputation overseas, though, wasn't a lawsuit at all, and didn't involve a single dog bite or a single dollar in damages. It was a single television interview that aired across an entire country. Banned in Britain. Cesar appeared on a UK talk show hosted by Alan Titchmarsh, who confronted him directly about footage from Dog Whisperer, showing Cesar punching dogs and using collars that delivered electric shocks. Alan called the physical punishment totally unacceptable on air, in front of the entire viewing public. The interview turned Cesar into a genuinely toxic figure in Britain almost overnight, the kind of reaction usually reserved for far bigger scandals than a single training method debate, forcing him to publicly defend himself to a country that had, up until that moment, mostly just seen the calm, confident television version of him. "I am not brutal or cruel to animals," Cesar said afterward in a statement to the Daily Mail, insisting shock collars were only ever used once every other option had already failed. He framed the tools as an absolute last resort, reserved only for dogs that would otherwise be put down, a line he's repeated consistently across nearly every interview where the topic has come up since. Critics weren't convinced. Canine expert Mark Derr, author of multiple books on dog behavior including Dog's Best Friend and How the Dog Became the Dog, wrote an op-ed in the New York Times dismissing Cesar's entire televised methodology as a collection of outdated theories that had already been scientifically disproven years earlier. For a man who'd already survived a divorce, a financial collapse, a fight over his own name, and a string of lawsuits, surviving a single bad interview should have been easy by comparison. Instead, it planted a reputation problem that would follow him for years. That ongoing reputation fight eventually fed into something even stranger. An attempt by the internet itself to make people believe Cesar Millan no longer existed at all. The internet almost finished him off. In early 2025, videos began spreading across YouTube, TikTok, and Facebook, claiming Cesar Millan had been sentenced to life in prison on charges including animal cruelty and fraud. The outlet Distractify investigated the claim directly and found no credible evidence of any arrest or criminal charges whatsoever. Cesar was confirmed to be actively posting on his own Instagram and making public appearances at the exact same time the hoax was spreading online. After Dog Whisperer was canceled in 2012, Cesar refused to disappear. He toured the world with a live show called Cesar Millan Live, telling the Denver Post he turned to live audiences specifically because he wasn't ready to give up on his career. Touring meant rebuilding his entire business model from the ground up, trading network paychecks and producer fights for ticket sales, and direct contact with the same fans who'd followed him through every controversy already covered here. It also meant proving, night after night in front of a live crowd, that the demonstrations people had watched on television actually worked the same way without editing or a camera crew shaping the story. He went on to star in Cesar Millan's Leader of the Pack and Cesar Millan's Dog Nation, wrote 3 New York Times best-selling books, and eventually returned to National Geographic in 2021 with Cesar Millan, Better Human, Better Dog, a series that's continued for multiple seasons since, with a 4th season premiering in April 2024 and a 5th following that August, marking 2 full decades of him appearing on American television in some form. Today, he operates the Dog Psychology Center, a 43-acre rehabilitation and training facility in Santa Clarita, California, which also doubles as a base for filming new content. 43 acres is a genuinely massive footprint for a single training operation, large enough to house the kind of full-scale pack environments his television demonstrations have always relied on, and a far cry from the modest setup he started with decades earlier before any of the fame, the lawsuits, or the financial collapse ever entered the picture. In March 2025, he launched the Pack Leadership Community, a live virtual coaching membership giving subscribers direct weekly access to him for real-time questions and behavior demonstrations. He's also partnered with Excel Brands on a new pet product line called Trust, Respect, Love by Cesar Millan, sitting in the same company portfolio as established fashion names like Halston. Landing a licensing deal alongside legacy fashion brands shows just how far his personal brand has traveled from broke television personality back to a name companies are willing to pay to put on their products. The exact kind of commercial trust that had completely evaporated for him back in 2010. His personal life rebuilt itself too. Cesar has been engaged to his longtime partner, Jahira Dar, since 2016, more than a decade removed from the divorce that helped trigger his original collapse. Did you know how close Cesar Millan actually came to losing everything back in 2010? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.